I recently made the mistake of watching Netflix's new docudrama series on Alexander the Great. Overall, not a fan, and mostly because of how they chose to take liberties in how they presented some of the history, and I think you all know what I'm talking about. Throughout the entire series, the daughter of Queen Statira is referred to as Barsine, when in reality this probably wasn't even her real name, and most ancient sources don't call her anything other than Statira II.
When Darius travels, he takes the whole of the court with him. Queen Statira, Barsine, his daughter, are all present themselves.
Or the fact that they speculate wildly on things which have no solid proof anywhere in our histories. Like when Alexander impregnates Darius' wife. Nothing in the ancient sources suggests anything like this. This is pure speculation. Or it's the fact that they completely skip key aspects of Alexander's story. They infantilize battles that reduce to screaming men running at each other out of formation, or that it fails completely as an educational series. Or maybe it's that they made Alexander gay. Only 8 minutes into the first episode of the series, and we have it stated unambiguously that Alexander was in a gay relationship with his lifelong friend, Hephaestion. And of course we get the same tired, faux scholarly explanations for this. Same-sex relationships were quite the norm throughout the Greek world. They weren't. The Greeks didn't even have a word for homosexuality. They did. Several, in fact, and what's telling, they were all negative. I don't even understand the logic on this one. How could something be widely practiced, but no one even had a word for it? Clearly, this is nothing more than a regurgitation of the exact same slop that modern scholars have been trying to feed the world on the subject of ancient homosexuality for the past few decades now. But okay, if they're going to claim Alexander and Hephaestion specifically were gay, what are they basing this on? Well, honestly, I'm not sure. The documentary is bad at providing evidence for their claims at the best of times, and this is no exception. The man doing the voiceover doesn't even hint at what in the historical record might have suggested that the two were gay, and I think I can tell you why. There is not even one historical account which refers to Hephaestion as anything other than Alexander's friend. This is just a plain fact, attested to by all scholars, including those from the pro-gay side. See here a quote from Robin Lane Fox, very much on the pro-gay side. Arrian, Diodorus, and Plutarch, three of our primary sources on Alexander, refer to Hephaestion as nothing other than philos, which means friend. Curtius and Justin, two of our other main sources on Alexander, only use amicus. And what's more, Arrian within the exact same work does refer at least once to two men as Erastes and Arimenos, hinting at a possible sexual connection between those two, and further reinforcing the fact that Alexander and Hephaestion would not have been described using those terms. This is really all you need to know. Alexander and Hephaestion being gay is necessarily speculation. Speculation that just happens to coincide with the modern political orthodoxy on homosexuality. But now I'd like to take a brief minute and tell you about the sponsor of today's video, Aura. The personal information of you and your loved ones is unfortunately not secure on the internet. Data brokers are constantly selling your personal information, including your name, your address, and even your health records to spammers and scammers alike. So that's where Aura comes in. Aura can show you exactly which data brokers are selling your information and automatically send opt-out requests to them all. So this not only will severely reduce the number of spam calls and emails that you receive, but much more vitally, it will protect your personal information and stop it getting into the hands of much more nefarious actors like hackers and thieves. Aura also contains an entire suite of tools which will protect your online privacy and safety, including a VPN, antivirus, password management tools, credit score tracking, identity theft insurance, and so much more. Now, perhaps you already have one or two of these tools, and that's a great idea for your security. But the benefit of using them with Aura is that you can use them all in tandem, which will further enhance your security. Plus, then you don't have to separately download, check, maintain, and by the way, pay for all of these apps when you can get them all in one with Aura. So if you want to enhance your online security and your digital privacy, then go to aura.com/leatherapron club. Link is down in the description of this video, and you can get a free 2-week trial. And thank you to Aura for sponsoring this video. But let's try to be fair and assume that these scholars are basing their speculation on something. What do they say it is? The main reason, and I promise I'm not making this up, this is not hyperbole or me trying to be glib. The main reason they say they were gay is because when Hephaestion died unexpectedly, Alexander was upset. This seems like a lie that they would base their entire speculation around this, so here are just a few examples of genuine scholars saying that this really is the reason why they think they were gay. And check the citation for more. This is their smoking gun. Exactly how intense does your grief for your dead friend have to be to cop gay allegations? Well, it was dramatic for sure. All authors agree on that, and they only differ really in the details. I'll read you Arrian's account in full to give you an idea. Until the third day after Hephaestion's death, Alexander neither tasted food nor paid any attention to his personal appearance, but lay on the ground, either bewailing or silently mourning. That he also ordered a funeral pyre to be prepared for him in Babylon at the expense of 10,000 talents. Some say at a still greater cost. That a decree was published throughout all of the barbarian territory for the observance of a public mourning. Many of Alexander's companions dedicated themselves and their arms to the dead Hephaestion in order to show their respect to him. And the first to begin the artifice was Eumenes, whom we a short time ago mentioned as having been at variance with him. This he did that Alexander might not think he was pleased at Hephaestion's death. Alexander did not appoint anyone else to be commander of the companion cavalry in the place of Hephaestion, so that the name of that general might not perish from the brigade. But that division of cavalry was still called Hephaestion's, and a figure made from Hephaestion went in front of it. He also resolved to celebrate a gymnastic and musical contest, much more magnificent than any of the preceding, both in the multitude of competitors and in the amount of money expended upon it. For he provided 3,000 competitors in all, and it is said that these men a short time after also competed in the games held at Alexander's own funeral. Does Arrian or any other writer suggest that Alexander was upset because Hephaestion was his lover? No. As stated above, no historian ever wrote that he was anything other than his friend. Realistically, and this is a bit of speculation on my part, the only reason this episode was probably given as much attention as it got was because people thought Alexander's behavior to be shameful. By openly displaying so much emotion and taking his grieving too far beyond the limits of what was acceptable, he was acting like a woman, which is unbecoming. It seems that any time a man had an overly emotional reaction in the ancient world, it was recorded in order to denigrate and shame him. Take for instance in the case of Hadrian and Antinous. Or take Seneca, who described how he chastised his friend for being too upset that his son had died. Lucian, in his Dialogues of the Dead, has the dead Philip scolding Alexander over his affection for Hephaestion. So far from these histories being an attempt to eulogize a beautiful love, they were basically just calling Alexander a pansy for caring so much. While we're at this, we may as well discuss every other way that they've tried to make Alexander and Hephaestion buddies. For one that I feel the need to discuss quickly here, often in relation to this discussion, you will hear a quote by Aristotle brought up wherein friendship is described as one soul abiding in two bodies. Now, almost every time this is brought up by the pro-gay side, they'll say that Aristotle was describing Alexander and Hephaestion. Whereas if you actually look up the quote, you'll see that Aristotle was just describing friendship in general, with no regard to Alexander and Hephaestion or any particular pair. Apparently some truth had to be sacrificed in that transition from sober, scholarly examination to thinly veiled propaganda. Next, we have to talk about pederasty. It's argued that pederasty was the norm in the culture, so it's not unreasonable to assume Alexander and Hephaestion were Eromenos and Erastes, and to then, on top of this, assume their pederastic relationship was sexual. The main problem is that the scholars who argue this are using the model of pederasty as described by Kenneth Dover in his book Greek Homosexuality. In this model, pederasty is a sexual relationship between a youth of about 12 to 18 years old and an older man, in his 20s to early 30s before marriage. Any male-on-male relationships outside of this framework were generally considered unacceptable. Now, I do have issues with this model of pederasty. I don't think the sexual element was as commonplace or unproblematic as they like to say it is, but let's assume it's basically true for the sake of the argument. The problem then becomes that Alexander and Hephaestion were roughly the same age, within a year or two of each other at most. So the Dover model wouldn't work, and this relationship would have been considered intensely problematic. It's therefore unlikely that this could have carried on without a single biographer mentioning anything about it, and as we have seen, none did. And as a quick addendum to this section, although nobody ever accused Alexander of being a pederast in the more sort of Dover fashion, that is, being involved with a younger man, it does still bear mentioning that on at least 2 occasions, he violently denied such pederastic relationships being offered to him. See the citations for more details on these cases. So in short, because these are the only 2 mentions that we have regarding Alexander and pederasty, it becomes more reasonable to conclude that he was never involved in one of these more Dover-esque sexual pederastic relationships. Another tactic they use against Alexander is to try and show that he wasn't sexually attracted to women. Ipso facto, he must have been gay. But I think this is tough to argue, because first of all, he was married 3 times, to Roxana of Bactria, Statira II, daughter of Darius, and Parysatis II, and he had at least 1 legitimate child survived by these marriages. Additionally, Plutarch tells us that he had at least 1 lover named Barcine before his first marriage, with whom he may have had an illegitimate child named Heracles. There could have even been 1 more mistress besides. Now, of course, the standard reply to this will be, just because he was into women doesn't mean he wasn't also into men, which is true, but perhaps a little dishonest. These are the same people that love to accuse men who never got married or never had children of being gay also. See, for example, Hadrian, Isaac Newton, Nikola Tesla, Beethoven, James Buchanan, Hume, Kierkegaard, Da Vinci, Nietzsche, Thoreau, Van Gogh, Vivaldi, and Voltaire. I'm just saying that if not getting married suggests that you might be gay, then certainly getting married 3 times suggests that you might not be. Speculation aside though, let's examine some more of what the contemporary histories say about his sexuality. If we believe some of the more outlandish stories, then Alexander maintained a personal harem of 365 concubines, having a new lady every day of the year. We also get the awesome story from Diodorus where a tribe of 300 Amazonians descends from the mountains and demands Alexander impregnate their queen. He is happy to oblige and then spends the next 13 days in the mountains with them and apparently leaves them all very happy and satisfied. While these stories are both unfortunately probably not true, there are some more grounded instances of Alexander showing a definite sexual attraction towards women. In one anecdote, Alexander is lusting over a minstrel girl entertaining him in his company one night. This girl, however, was brought by his friend, Antipatridus. And when Antipatridus said that he was interested in this girl, Alexander was upset but pursued it no further. In another instance, Alexander is commenting on the attractiveness of Persian women, basically calling them all ugly. Now sure, he wasn't attracted to these women, but this isn't the type of statement made by someone who is ambivalent about how women look in general. So if we can so easily establish that Alexander was attracted to women, what sorts of arguments are these people using to say that he wasn't? First, they argue that because some sources say that Alexander had a general disinterest in sex, he must have been gay. He was much less addicted to wine than was generally believed. That which gave people occasion to think so of him was that when he had nothing else to do, he loved to sit long and talk, rather than drink, and over every cup hold in long conversation. For when his affairs called upon him, he would not be detained, as other generals often were, either by wine or sleep or play, sex, spectacles, or any other diversion whatsoever. Curtius commented on this behavior as well. He was fond of wine, but not to the extent of drunkenness. When he had leisure, he remained long at table, but rather for social intercourse than excessive drinking. He scorned sensual pleasures to such an extent that his mother was anxious lest he might be unable to beget offspring. This manner of life he continued for a long time, and showed himself a great and noteworthy king. Gradually, however, carried away by his good fortune, he changed his habits and lost his former self-control. At one point, Alexander seems so apathetic towards sex that his mother hires a famous prostitute to sleep with her son, but he eventually refuses. Why exactly his mother hired this prostitute is unclear. In a somewhat bizarre take, Athenaeus tells us that it's because she was concerned that his drinking and partying would have made him sterile, and she wanted Alexander to have an heir. Alexander carried his carousing to such a point, according to Charistius of Pergamum in historical notes, that he even went reveling in a chariot drawn by asses. The Persian kings did this too, Charistius says. Perhaps, therefore, it was for this reason that he had no appetite for sexual indulgence. For Aristotle, in his Physical Problems, says that the semen of such persons becomes watery. Hieronymus, in his epistles, quotes Theophrastus as saying that Alexander was not in good condition for sexual commerce. Olympius, Aristotle, and Philip were aware of this, and actually caused the Thessalian courtesan Calixena, who was a very beautiful woman, to lie with him, for they feared he might prove to be a womanish man, and Olympius often begged him to have intercourse with Calixena. So in that quote, we saw mentioned that his parents and Aristotle were potentially concerned that he would become a womanish man, essentially become gay. But of course, this too doesn't fit with a common narrative. If being gay was so common at the time, then why would they have cared? The pro-gay side is really just clutching at straws here when they're trying to prove that Alexander was gay just because he was a Volcel. A more sober examination of his life would simply show that he was a morally upright man. According to all reliable accounts, he never had a mistress while married. After their capture in battle, he never treated the wife or daughter of Darius poorly. And frankly, we should expect this type of behavior. Alexander wasn't a brute. He was a philosopher warrior king brought up in the most venerable intellectual tradition in the West, tutored by Aristotle of all people. I'm going to go out on a limb here, if possibly not that far out on the limb, and say that regardless of whether or not Alexander was gay, Netflix's decision to include this scene was politically motivated. First, like we said, it is included at the 8-minute mark of the first episode. Even if he was gay, it was clearly an unimportant aspect of his life, given that nobody ever mentioned it. Of everything Alexander accomplished, of everything interesting that happened to him in his life, this is not something that should be brought to the forefront, except possibly in a society which looks to put homosexuality on a pedestal at every opportunity. Just consider what the showrunners left out in order to make sure they included this gay scene. Perhaps they could have shown him taming Bucephalus, the untamable horse, shown him defeating the sacred band of Thebes at the age of 18, or looked at the time he spent as a student with Aristotle, where Hephaestion, by the way, was one of his classmates. This also could have been used to develop his friendship with Hephaestion in a more meaningful way. But instead, the two are no more connected than two metrosexuals who met on Grindr. The other reason we can be pretty sure this was political is that it is otherwise completely unreasonable for the showrunners to present as fact what is a very contentious claim. This is bad history at best and dishonest propagandizing at worst. So was Alexander gay? No. In short, there is not a single piece of evidence from any historical source, even from authors that were hostile to him, that he was. Any attempts by modern scholars to tease out hints of a gay Alexander are specious and wishful thinking on the parts of bad actors trying to push a modern political agenda. Thank you all for watching.